real quick on the tour. I'll be sending out an email this week. I know Gene asked some things about attire, dress attire. We're going to be talking about a lot of things starting next month. We're going to be talking about the culture of the various people there, what we wear, what we don't wear. We're going to cover it all before you leave. I promise. I know you haven't heard much from me, but you'll be tired of hearing from me in the next few months. We're going to cover it all. We're going to try to answer your questions. We're going to talk a lot about the spiritual aspect over there, the physical aspect, the cultural aspect over there, food, and everything else. So what I want to share with you is there's a conference going on in Jacksonville right now with Ron Cantor, Michael Brown, Scott Volk, and a lot of other guys. It's called Israel and the Coming Revival, and you can watch it on YouTube or God TV. They shared something last night that just set me on fire. For the first time ever, the laws have changed, and an Israeli TV producer came to Ron Cantor and wanted to meet with him. And he figured it was about God TV because he's the regional director of God TV in Israel. And he came and said, they talked for a little while, and then Ron said, "Why do you have me here?" And he said, "Well, we would like to put a believing Messianic channel on our Israeli TV."
Wow.
And Ron said, "We don't want to put an English Messianic," that's what he wanted on his TV. He said, "We want a Hebraic, a Hebrew, gospel-giving program on your network." The man said, "It's possible." Well, it has happened. A man has come forward and has donated to cover it for 7 years.
Wow.
And starting in January, Israelis will freely hear the gospel every day on TV. First time, if you don't think we're not living at the time of the revival and restoration, wake up.
Yeah.
I mean, it just thrills my soul.
I wonder what that would cost. Any idea what that would cost? 7 years of airtime. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they still have a production team cost to cover, but for the man to cover the actual TV for 7 years, he came forward. And they didn't ask anybody. The man just came forward.
Showed up.
That's amazing.
Who's going to be given that? Do you know? Who's going to be?
Well, it's part of the channel, the God TV channel. So Ron and their production team it will be geared toward Israelis in Hebrew. So I guess they'll pick various shows to do in Hebrew. I'm not sure of the details of all that.
I seem to have lost my remote for the projector. Oh. I'm going to say, even a blind hog finds an acorn every now and then.
That's right.
I think it came and plugged in the wall. Well, Shabbat Shalom. Once this gets warmed up here, I'll talk to you about some announcements we have. Tomorrow, I know right off the top of my head, Jack Zimmerman at 10:30 will be at Victory Family Church here in Dothan, the north side of Dothan. And then he's somewhere later in that evening, but I don't remember.
It's out on Highway 134.
Gateway on Highway 134. Okay. So if you want any more information on that, see Bonnie or Denise, and they can give you some more details on that. But Jack Zimmerman is a Messianic rabbi, works for Chosen People Ministries. And let me see if I can get this to pop up here on the screen. Let me see if I can enter Jewish Voice.
Yeah, he's with Jewish Voice.
Jewish Voice, yeah, thank you, I'm sorry. Very similar.
Jonathan Burness.
Yes.
Oh, it's going to be weird for me.
I want to be there.
Recognize that from you distracted everybody in here with
Yeah.
It's like, he lost his.
Anybody know how to make it not split screen like that?
Yeah.
Would you mind to come up and I'll just talk through announcements and then. Well, wait, no, I think I got it. Never mind, I got it. I'm sorry. I just got to go through these slides here. Sorry, I'm not using my normal Apple because it just so happens a big cup of coffee poured all over my MacBook, and it worked for a couple hours, and then it doesn't work now. So, huh? It was expensive. Yeah. It was very expensive. So, anyways, I'm using a Windows, which it is what it is. We're blessed to have technology to be able to do that. So tomorrow I'll be at Mims Hill Church, which is a little bit north of Geneva. You guys are welcome to attend. If you don't attend, just be in prayer for me that I say what I'm supposed to say and teach what I'm supposed to teach. And that God gives me discernment and wisdom in those areas. They're asking me to teach on Messiah and Passover, and then teach them how to celebrate Passover. That they want to be able to do that on their own.
Amen.
And has someone help me remember to get Passover stuff. Maybe Jackie, could you help me remember to get Passover stuff, like some matzah and a Seder plate and some other elements and stuff, so I can set up a little table. Help keep me on track there. My Hanukkah teaching has been pushed back to December 7th. I'm going to teach why we celebrate Hanukkah, how to celebrate Hanukkah, kind of give you a kind of a crash course on that. That's going to be Saturday, December 7th. I could use some youngins during Oneg while everybody's in line. The line's really long, to go back there and help me pack up the volleyball nets that are back there that we use for the youth night. And I want to say thank you to those who visited the Bessarabs and have been praying for them. It was so cool. I was down there at the Bessarabs a couple weeks back, and Alexi's phone rang, and it was Kelsey, Joy's husband, calling to see when he could come down and fix their van. I was like, that's so cool, that's the way it should be. But people went down this past week. Marvin went down, and Patrick and Ariana and other people have gone down and helped them do stuff. So it's really neat to see them be supported through our love and prayers and making of food and everything else. But how are we doing on meals with them?
They're pretty good right now.
They're pretty good right now. Okay. All right. So we'll check in this time next week, and see if they're in need of any food. But keep them in your prayers, and more importantly, if you want to pick up the phone and call them and just pray with them over the phone, or set up a time to visit them, they would absolutely love your company down there. And that's all the announcements, unless I missed any. Did I miss any? Okay, excellent. It's kind of a quiet month, isn't it? Yeah, it's rare that we have these months like this, but let's knock on wood. This week's Torah portion is Vayera, as we read in the scroll earlier, as Bonnie read, and it starts in Genesis chapter 18, if you want to turn there. Genesis chapter 18. And I will say I have a little a note here that Lisa handed me. There are some people, I have not personally met these people, Danny and Georgette O'Connor, but they were involved in a bad car accident. They live in Pensacola, is that right? Navarre, I'm sorry. They're in Navarre. There's broken ribs involved and pneumonia involved.
His wife was in a very bad car accident, and she broke a bunch of ribs. And when she got to the hospital, they found out she had pneumonia on top of it.
Wow.
She's in Pensacola Hospital right now.
Okay.
They need a lot of prayer because she was the only help for her daughter, who has 3 children, and she was traveling from Navarre to Crestview every day to help babysit in her vehicle.
Wow.
And now their whole family's without a vehicle.
It really disrupts
And
things.
her husband can't even get from Navarre to Pensacola to go visit his wife in the hospital because they have no way. No meetings. So
Okay.
they need a lot
Yeah.
of prayer.
If we want to pass this sheet around, if you want to get a photo of it with your phone, at the very least, if you want to call them and let them know that you're praying for them, but even more, if you wanted to try to ask how we could help them or whatever the case may be, I'm going to pass this around, start over here, and just snap a photo of it. Just be in prayer for their family, and then maybe give them a call sometime this week and pray with them over the phone, or just let them know that you're praying for them. Vayera starts in Genesis 18, and we are, we're in the 4th parsha of 54, so we have 50 more to go. And I suspect that we'll probably, I need to talk to Bobby about this, but we'll probably finish out this Torah cycle in the next fall, and then we'll probably pick up and do something more thematic, or maybe go through an entire book of the Bible together. Maybe we'll do something like a survey and see who wants to learn about which book of the Bible, and then teach through a book of the Bible that way. But we're going to go through this Torah cycle, and then probably the year after next we'll do the Torah cycle again. But it's a good repetition to maintain and go through on a yearly basis. But I wanted to start off by reading Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 22. I've got a shorter teaching for you today because of the Torah service and everything like this, but I didn't have, usually I do the vocabulary words. I don't have that today, so I'm sorry to disappoint. But we'll still learn some vocabulary. So let's look at Genesis 18, 1 through 21 together. And we're going to read this story about this man, Abraham, and where we pick up here. And Adonai appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of the tent of his tent during the heat of the day. He raised his eyes and looked, and there in front of him stood 3 men. Anashim is in Hebrew. And he seeing them, he ran from the tent door to meet them. This happened 3 days after his circumcision, by the way. Prostrated himself on the ground and said, Adonai, if I have found favor or chen in your sight, please don't leave your servant. Please let me send for some water so that you can wash your feet So that's where the first occurrence we see someone offering to wash someone else's feet, just like our master did. Then rest under the tree, and I will bring a piece of bread. Now that you've come to your servant, refresh yourselves before going on. Very well, they replied. We'll do what you have said. In verse 6, Avraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly, 3 measures of the best flour. Where else do we see 3 measures of flour? Knead it and make cakes. This is 3 seahs. This is 3 seahs of flour. This is exactly what was required. This is the smallest amount of grain offering that you could bring on the altar. So there's something significant there. And also, Yeshua says the kingdom of heaven in Matthew 13:33. The kingdom of heaven is like a woman who hid leaven in 3 measures of flour. And I will bring a piece of bread. And now that you have come to your... I'm sorry, I jumped all over the place. Abraham ran to the herd. He took a good, tender calf and gave it to the servant who hurried to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared, and he set it all before the men and stood by them under the tree as they ate. And this could open up a whole other discussion about kosher diets and mixing meat and dairy, which we don't have time for today, but maybe for a different year. They said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, there in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return to you around this time next year. And we got pretty good evidence that this happens around Passover or on Passover. And Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Sarah heard him from the entrance of the tent and behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were old. They were advanced in years, and they were past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself, thinking, I'm old, and so is my Lord. Am I to have pleasure again? Now, what's interesting about this is we already know Isaac's name, what it's going to be. Not because Sarah laughed, but because Abraham laughed first. We talked about this last night at Shabbat dinner. In Genesis 17, if you wanted to read on, Abraham is the first one to laugh.
Really?
And then he gets given the name Yitzchak, laughter. Yeah. And then Sarah laughs as well. They both laugh at this. In other words, they're both doubtful that they can bear a son. They both doubt the promises of God. And so she laughs. And she says, am I really going to bear a child so old? Is anything too hard for Adonai at the time set for it at this season next year? I will return to you, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah denied it, saying, I didn't either laugh, because she was afraid. And he said, not so, you did laugh. And the men set out from there and looked over toward Sodom. And Abraham went to see them on their way. And Adonai said, should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Inasmuch as Abraham is sure to become a great and strong nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by him. Remember, we talked last week about how do the families of the earth get blessed by Abraham? It's that mixing in, the v'nivrachu. It's the mixing in, the grafting in. For I have made myself known to him, so that he will give orders to his children and to his household after him to keep the way of Adonai and to do what is right and just, so that Adonai may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. In verse 20, and Adonai said, the outcry of Sodom and Amorah is so great and their sin so serious that I will now go down and see whether their deeds warrant the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. So we're going to pause the story right there. Let's talk about these cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. This is a map here. There's a lot of different theories surrounding the location of these cities. And it was actually more like 5 cities that kind of morphed into this metropolitan area. And they think that one theory is that these cities were located about right here. But what's interesting about this, what do you notice? They're under water, right? Yeah, that's one theory, and this is a pretty strong theory, is the location. And the theory is that the Dead Sea, the Sea of Salt, had its different borders in terms of the amount of water that it contained. And so at maybe some point the Dead Sea was much smaller, and these cities were built, and eventually the Dead Sea kind of overtook those cities. But what's interesting about this, how many of you know the Dead Sea is evaporating at a rapid rate right now? Isn't that interesting? And I mean, I went there last September, and there are docks that go out and stop still on dry land that are like 40, 50 feet above your head. And the water is still another 100 feet to the shoreline. But 30 years ago, those docks You could jump off those docks into the water. The water is evaporating. So it's interesting that Yeshua says that in the last days, Sodom and Gomorrah will actually rise up and condemn that generation. So it's interesting, if the waters keep receding the way they are, perhaps maybe they'll discover the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't know. It's interesting to theorize. But this is where they're at, and this is Mamre, or Hebron. This is the oak tree where we talk about he was at the oak of Mamre. It's interesting to think about these giant and ancient oak trees that maybe were in the land. Many of you probably have seen the oak tree down in Geneva on the river. One of the things we used to do is we'd go down there and I would take a picture of this giant oak tree. You know, the branches come down and they hit the ground and they go back up. And it's theorized that it was there during the Revolutionary War. And I used to sit Noah on my lap and we would take a picture of him as I sat on one of these branches. And we did that for a few years, and just kind of neat to see the progression of Noah growing up using that oak tree as backdrop. But that's an oak tree that's embedded in local folklore. You know, like a lot of people know. How many of you know about that oak tree in Geneva? Yeah, and that's how we're still that way. We know about big trees for some reason, right? We look at something that's very ancient and we're like, oh, I know about that. Because that's something that's a relic from the past that's still alive. And that would have been the case then. They would have used these giant ancient trees as benchmarks, as where their reference points, as to where they're at on the map. But I saw your hand.
Oh yeah, I was going to, like, Native Americans would still use a lot of these, not today, but like then a lot of these big ones on rivers.
Yeah.
They were pointers for how far you traveled and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, absolutely. What's Sodom's outcry? I wanted to talk about Sodom's outcry because it says that I've heard their outcry. And who is the she that is crying it? The Hebrew word for outcry, sorry my format didn't really stick with PowerPoint there, but it's sa'aka. It's used 21 times in the Hebrew Bible, and it's the same sa'aka the Israelites make in Exodus 3 when they're being oppressed in slavery. They're crying out for justice. They're crying out for liberty. This is the same cry that Egypt makes after the firstborn sons were killed in the 10th plague. They're crying out for mercy. They're crying out for justice. Then it's the same cry that Job makes as the world seems to be crushing and caving in around him. He's crying out for justice and mercy. So how is Sodom making this cry? And do they even have the right to do it? Yeah.
Because maybe this generation is so much worse than they that they're crying out for, hey, wait a second, you judged us for like we were way over here and they're way over here.
Yeah. Maybe it's like a more future tense crying out, or like a condemnation. Any other theories?
It's the land.
The land crying out. That's an interesting theory, yeah. Anybody else? This has ancient rabbis perplexed as well. And let's see what their theories are. But first, let's talk about Sodom's chiefest sins. What do we know about Sodom? What do you know about Sodom, and what charges were leveled against it? Someone tell me. Sexual immorality. Corruption. Idolatry. Okay.
Wasn't it later mentioned in like the New Testament books that they did not take care of like the orphans and the widows?
Yeah, perhaps. We even have a law on the books, and it's a legal terminology called sodomy, because it's named after this place. Isn't that interesting? When we think of Sodom, we always think of homosexual behavior or bestiality. If you look it up in the dictionary, that's the dictionary definition of sodomy. But I hope to shed some new light on that with you guys today. Now, I do think that homosexuality is an abomination in the eyes of God. I think that it always will be an abomination in the eyes of God. And I think the New Testament, I could prove that using the New Testament as well, and the writings of Paul as well. But this is what some of the ancient rabbis say. The Midrash Rabbah, which is a very old Midrash on the Torah, says it once happened, and I'm going to read this for people who are listening online. It once happened that two girls went down to draw water from a well, and one said to the other, "Why are you so pale?" She says, "We have no more food left, and we're ready to die." And she replied, "What did she do?" She filled her pitcher with flour, and they exchanged their pitchers, each taking the other's. And when the Sodomites discovered this, they took and burnt her. God said, "Even if I desire to be silent, justice for that young girl does not permit me to keep silent." Hence, it does not say whether they have done according to their cry, namely the cry of the Sodomites, but according to her cry, the cry of that maiden. So that's where they're coming up with some theories about the cry of a female that's been oppressed or somebody who's been oppressed inside the city of Sodom. Here's the Sanhedrin 109b. A certain maiden gave some bread to a poor man, hiding it in a pitcher. When the matter became known, they daubed her with honey and placed her on the parapet of the wall, the city wall, and bees came and consumed her. Thus it is written, and the Lord said, the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah, because it is great. That is her cry. So that's another theory. Here's another theory. They issued a proclamation in Sodom saying, everyone who strengthens the hand of the poor and the needy with a loaf of bread shall be burnt by fire. Pelotitz, the daughter of Lot, was wedded to one of the wealthy men of Sodom. She saw a certain very poor man in the street of the city, and her soul was grieved on his account. What did she do? Every day when she went out to draw water, she put in the pitcher all kinds of provisions from her house, and she sustained that poor man. The men of Sodom said, how does this poor man stay alive? And when they ascertained the facts, they brought her forth to be burnt by fire. And she said, sovereign of all world, maintain my right and my cause at the hands of the men of Sodom. And her cry ascended before the throne of glory. So maybe this is the cry that's being cried out. This is interesting. If you've ever opened up the book of Jasher, it's full of information about about Sodom and Gomorrah. In every city, there are those who are poor. In the ancient times, the poor would sit near the gates of the city asking for money to buy food. And according to the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, if a poor man was seen asking for money for food, he was taken into the center of the city and constrained. He was tied up. There, the citizens of Sodom would give him money, but when he would offer the money for food, no one was permitted to sell him any food. So he had a lot of money, but they wouldn't even sell him the food. And then, no matter how much he offered, no one would sell or give him any food because of his constraints. They would watch the man starve to death. Then each man of Sodom would retrieve his money, and the man would be buried in a bush, under a bush in the wilderness. So that for their own entertainment, they would watch someone starve to death, which is one of the most horrific ways to die, by the way. But it was like a torture. It was like seeing someone and torturing them to death. And then what's even worse about it is they would give him money to make it look like they're charitable, and then it was actually just a ruse, right? Yeah.
These are just theories
Mhm.
of rabbis that have come up.
Yes.
But wouldn't you think that in all truth that would probably be going on? There had to have been, righteous people that wanted to help out.
Yeah.
But probably were killed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of the corruption and the wickedness that these
Definitely. And, yeah.
Wouldn't there also have been just innocent people? I mean, if you're talking about a place that was so overcome with perversion and all, there was children there. There were people there that,
Absolutely.
The cry of them would have come forth. They're not necessarily righteous by nature, but they were still innocent.
Yeah.
And God
And
always
pure,
has heard and sided with,
especially the oppressed.
Right, innocence.
Yeah. This is what Scripture says about Sodom and Gomorrah. This is found in Ezekiel 16:49. Now this was the iniquity, this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, they were overfed, and they were complacent or comfortable. They did not help the poor and the needy. Thus they were haughty, and they committed abominations. So the abominations is just a symptom of their haughtiness, their comfortability, their arrogance, and their being overfed. In other words, they didn't really have to strive to survive. They had it made. And all that complacency just led to the abominations that we saw and that we hear about and then we write laws about. Isn't that interesting? And it says, when I saw this, I had to remove them. Yeah.
Sounds like us today.
Sounds like us.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's even cities now that are starting to put in place laws that won't allow you to go feed the poor. They won't.
Yeah.
Like, you hear about it more and more now.
And they put those spikes up under like bridges and stuff to keep homeless.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that leads me to another point, is I think Dothan is doing a really good job. And we as a congregation are supporting a number of ministries here locally in Dothan that are supporting the homeless and making sure that they go fed and clothed and are warm and are receiving the gospel. Dothan does a pretty good job at that. I'm proud of that. But, we live in Alabama. We live in the Bible Belt. So that's results of being in the Word of God and being immersed in that culture, is that we just think, human being, we need to keep them alive and and give them the necessities of life. But that might not be the case in other places where the Word of God is not ingrained in the culture there. So, yeah, absolutely. Matthew 10:15, and if anyone will not welcome you or heed your words, if they're not hospitable to you, in other words, then I tell you, it'd be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on that day of judgment than for them. So there's something about hospitality. God's trying to say, if you are inhospitable, especially to the oppressed, especially to those who are in a place of desperation and innocence, then that is a surefire way to bring my judgment upon you. I thought that's interesting. So what's the response now? So going back into our story, how does Abraham respond? So now that you kind of have a clearer picture of what the culture of Sodom was like, what was Abraham's response to that? Now surely Abraham knew all that, right? Surely Abraham knew, because his own nephew lived there. Surely he knew the evils that were going on within that city wall. And if anyone had the right to say, you go right ahead, wipe them out, it would be Abraham. They are a blight. Please wipe them out. But what's his response? What would your response be?
There's got to be somebody there. That's what I would say.
Yeah. What about the innocent people?
Well, look, Abraham says, are you going to wipe away the righteous with the wicked?
Yeah.
Can we back up just a minute?
Yeah.
On the outcry.
Yeah.
In my Bible, it says the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah,
Yeah.
not the outcry of.
Yeah.
Some say the outcry of.
If I'm not mistaken, and I need to check it, that is not in the original Hebrew text. That it just says the outcry of Sodom.
Okay.
Yeah, my Bible has it as well. And I checked it against the Hebrew, and it's not there.
Against is not in there.
Against is not in there. It's not an accusation. It's an outcry of Sodom that's going forth. Yeah. So it's theorized that there's a few righteous there who are crying out, a few innocent there, a few oppressed there that are crying out, and that's what's being heard by them, by God, is that outcry. And it is indirectly against them.
It is an outcry of those who are being.
Yeah. And it's an indirect accusation because they're crying out for mercy, for justice, just like we saw the people here in Exodus 3. Exodus 3 in Job and in Egypt, they're crying out for justice and mercy. And that is, in effect, that's indirectly an accusation against the people that are surrounding those innocent people. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah.
Hey, Gabby?
Yeah.
Why would righteous people be in that town? That seems like it'd be a no-go zone.
Yeah.
Slaves,
Well,
servants.
I think that's a really good question, and I think someone asked me this one time too about the Jewish people leaving Babylon. The majority of Jewish people did not leave Babylon when given the opportunity to do so. They stayed there, and the question has to be asked, why? And I think it's because we as human beings, we get in a routine, and we get comfortable. We put down roots. We start a garden. We build a house. We start a business. Then we have children. They have children. And it's like for me to pick all of that up, all of my livelihood, and to try to move all that is just next to impossible. And then convince all of my loved ones to do the same thing with me is next to impossible. And it's like, you know what? I've got it kind of made here. I'm comfortable. I've got this routine. Or maybe you were born there even. And it's like, I'm just kind of, this is my home, you know? And we can kind of translate that to United States of America as well. And ask ourselves the question, yeah, I'm an American citizen and I have a Social Security card and I've got this and that. I've got a birth certificate and all this stuff. But is that my identity in terms of the kingdom? So if there's things going on in the United States of America that are opposed to the kingdom of God and my kingdom citizenship, which transcends my American citizenship, if they're no longer conducive, then I have a decision to make. Where do I go?
But some people aren't able to move.
Yeah.
We just heard about the couple here. He can't even get down and go see his wife.
Yeah, it's very true.
Let's try to move somewhere.
Yeah.
That's a really good point because okay, they don't have mass media or anything else. They might know of the villages around them or whatever.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's like, where would I go? Where would I go?
Yeah.
And what if
it's not only
they're
that,
old?
In our American mind, with all his resources and everything, we're like, you know what? Our kids can just move across the country; they're perfectly fine. As I was talking to my barber in Baghdad, as ISIS was sweeping right through the whole country. And he just happened to have a cross in his barbershop. I was like, oh. He's like, yeah, I'm a Christian. And I mean, this is the place where Christian churches are being burnt down and everything. You know, people here talk about persecution because somebody just like turns their nose up at you. Over there, they're actually being, bombed and murdered. And that was the same question I asked him. I said, why don't you just move? Mm-hmm. And he said, my family is here. I do not leave my family. Mm-hmm. And that's the sense that, they're to this day, there are 29 tribes in Iraq, and each one person can identify with one of those tribes. Mm-hmm. So it's not like us, where we're just have such an independent mentality. Yeah. They're their family, they stay together for better or worse.
It was like the Cubans. I have Cuban friends that have left their mother, and children have come with their dad.
Fleeing communism, fleeing Castro and stuff.
But not all the family could go.
Yeah.
The mother got left behind. The grandmother came. And so it was torn apart.
Well, we would have seen this in the late 1940s with so many Jews being displaced and trying to and pulling up everything they had, which was very little. They were able to do it faster because they had so much little because of the devastation of the Holocaust. You know what? I've got everything that I have just fits in a suitcase. Yep. I might as well hop on this boat and try to run a barricade and try to get into, at that point, British-controlled Palestine. But things slow us down and impede our judgment. And Yeshua talks about this, how it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. What he's saying is that material stuff slows us down and impedes our judgment and impedes our decision-making skills, if that makes sense. It absolutely does. But Todd, did you have another?
Yeah, well, I guess further along in the verses, Lot's daughters thought they were isolated and they were the last people. Just what kind of thing was going on that they thought that was the world?
Yeah,
and that was the only people.
Yeah, I think it might be a slow boil. Yeah. It might not have been that way when they first moved, and then a generation later, I don't know. Or they were just completely lackadaisical about it and didn't care. And it was just going on around them. I don't know.
Maybe that's kind of like the contrast between Lot probably would have had a house or maybe several.
Yeah.
And Abraham, you can only pick up and move so much stuff when you have camels.
Yeah.
So stuff is limited.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you have a 30-year mortgage and all that.
Yeah.
It's tough, yeah.
Well, that's easier because it's not yours. So.
Yeah, true.
Just don't give the bank your address.
So, yeah. Let's pick up in the story now and see Abraham's response. And many of you know and familiar with this story. It says in verse 22, chapter 18, verse 22, the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom. But Abraham remained there, standing before Adonai. Abraham approached and said, will you actually sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Maybe there are 50 righteous people in the city. Will you actually sweep away the place and not forgive it for the sake of 50 righteous who are there? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous along with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Abraham's appealing to God's chesed, God's mercy, his loving kindness. He knows this about his maker, and he wants to appeal to that. He says, far be it from you. Shouldn't the judge of all the earth do what is just? Can you imagine saying that? Talk about tenacity. Adonai said, if I find in Sodom 50 who are righteous, then I will forgive the whole place for their sake. And Abraham answered, hear now, who am I but dust and ashes? I've taken upon myself to speak to Adonai. What if there are 5 less than 50 righteous? And he said, I won't destroy it if there are 45 there. He spoke to him yet again, what if there are 40 found there? He said, for the sake of 40, I won't do it. He said, I hope Adonai won't be angry if I speak. What if 30 are found there? And he said, I won't do it if I find 30 there. He said, hear now, I've taken it upon myself to speak to Adonai. What if 20 are found there? And he said, for the sake of the 20, I will not destroy it. And he said, I hope Adonai won't be angry if I speak just one more time. What if 10 are found there? And he said, for the sake of 10, I won't destroy it. Now this is where, in Judaism, we get the concept of a minyan. A minyan is a group of 10 Jewish men that can meet, and they are a formal synagogue. They are a formal prayer group. They form a minyan, and you can say certain prayers if you have a minyan than if you don't. But it's thought that 10 righteous undo like the 10 bad spies as well. But this is another place where we get this concept of a minion, these 10 men. And it says, Adonai went on his way as soon as he had finished speaking to Avraham, and Avraham returned to his place. The two angels came to Sodom that evening when Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. So Lot was quite possibly a person of prominence, quite possibly someone in leadership in this city, quite possibly an elder of the city sitting at the gate. That's where the elders sat. And Lot saw them, and he got up to greet them, and he prostrated himself on the ground, much like Abraham did. And he said, "Here now, my lords, please come over to your servant's house, spend the night, wash your feet," just like Abraham offered to wash their feet, "get up early and go on your way." "No," they answered, "we'll stay in the city square." But he kept pressing them. So they went home with him, and he made them a meal, baking unleavened bread or matzah for the supper, which they ate. But before they could go back to bed, the men of the city surrounded the house, young and old, everyone from every neighborhood of Sodom. They called out to Lot and said, "Where are the men who came to stay with you tonight? Bring them out to us. We want to have sex with them." And Lot went out to them and stood in the doorway, closing the door behind him. And he said, "Please, my brothers, don't do such a wicked thing. Look here, I have 2 daughters who are virgins. Please, bring them out to you, and you can do whatever seems good to you. But don't do anything to these 2 men, since they are guests in my house." "Stand back," they replied. "This guy came to live here, and now he's decided to play judge. For that, we'll deal worse with you than with them." Then they brought the crowd out to Lot, in on Lot, in order to get close enough to break down his door. And the men inside the city the men inside reached out their hands, brought Lot into the house, and shut the door. Then they struck the men at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they could not find the doorway. The men said to Lot, "Do you have any people here besides yourself, whomever you have left in the city, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters? Bring them out of this place, because we are going to destroy it. Adonai has become aware of the great outcry against them, and Adonai has sent us to destroy it." Lot went out and spoke with his sons-in-law. So he must have had more daughters who were married as well, who had married his daughters, and he said, "Get up and leave this place, because Adonai is going to destroy the city." But the sons-in-laws didn't take him seriously. When morning came, the angels told Lot to hurry and get up. They said, "And take your wife and your daughters, who are here with you, your 2 daughters. Otherwise you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he dallied. So the men took hold of his hand and his wife's hand and the hands of the 2 daughters, and Adonai was being merciful to him and led him out, leading them outside the city. Then they had brought them out. He said, "Flee for your life, don't look behind you, and don't stop anywhere in the plain, but escape to the hills. Otherwise you will be swept away." And Lot said to him, "Please, no, my lord. Here your servant has already found favor in your sight, and you have shown me greater mercy by saving my life. But I can't escape to the hills, because I'm afraid the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Look, there's a town to flee to. It's nearby, and it's a small one. Please let me escape there." "It isn't just a small one. Isn't it just a small one? And that is the way I will stay alive." And he replied, "All right, I agree to what you have asked, and I won't overthrow the city of which you have spoken." That's the city of Zoar. "Hurry and escape to that place, because I can't do anything until you arrive there." And you know the rest of the story, where Lot's wife turns around and turns into a pillar of salt and all that. But Abraham's response is what really intrigued me about this, that Abraham is willing to negotiate for the salvation of Sodom. And he's using the few righteous inside the city to do that. Let's compare and contrast the righteousness of Abraham with the wickedness of Sodom and see. Abraham dwelt in tents and followed the voice of God. In other words, he was flexible. God says, pick up and move. He's like, all right, not a big deal. Sodom built a city and remained obstinate to the voice of God. Abraham showed hospitality to visitors. Sodom murdered its visitors. Abraham fed them without requiring repayment, whereas Sodom allowed his visitors to starve for entertainment. Abraham intercedes on the behalf of the guilty, and Sodom attempted to rape and kill the innocent. Interesting. Do I condemn or intercede for the lost? So I like that Julia got up and prayed for those who are yet to have a fuller revelation of the work and the ministry and the teachings of Yeshua and the Torah. And that's how we're supposed to do it. We're to pray that the Spirit is poured out on them. They have revelation and not condemn them. Do we step into the place of the Almighty and seek to judge, or do we walk in the humility of Abraham and tenaciously intercede on their behalf? In other words, do we almost get on God's nerves, begging for mercy for them, begging for their salvation? For your name's sake, don't judge them. For your holiness' sake, don't pour out your wrath on them. Have mercy on them. Yeshua intercedes and is interceding for us right now before the very throne of glory. So if we're in the faith of Abraham following after Yeshua, we're called to be people who do not condemn, we do not judge, but we intercede.
A nation of priests.
A nation of priests, absolutely. How do we pray for the lost and those in unrepentant sin is the final question I want to ask. Do we condemn and accuse, or do we pray for their falsities, for their false security, and for their false gods to be condemned and judged? If you notice the plagues that were inflicted upon Egypt, God is doing that. He's not just picking these arbitrary things and bringing havoc on those things. They worship the Nile. He kills the Nile and turns it into blood. They worshipped sheep. He has everyone go and kill sheep. He's shaking the very foundations of their religious system, and he's judging their false gods, their false sense of security. And that's the best way that we can pray for people who are lost, people who need redemption, people who need salvation, is to say, Father, judge their false gods. Judge their false sense of security. And I am so quick, especially when it comes to sexual sin and perversion or pedophilia or you name it. It's like, man, I could be so quick to get angry and say, God, I really wouldn't mind if you just zapped them. You know what I'm saying? Just took them off, just sulfur and hailstone. Do whatever you got to do. But I don't think that's how Abraham would have interceded for someone that's lost in sin. Abraham would have said, judge that addiction. Shake that addiction to its core to where that no longer brings them pleasure, so that they will become desperate and addicted to your presence and addicted to your word. And I think that's how we should be praying, especially for those who are fellow believers. And if we want them to come into a fullness of the gospel and experience the goodness of keeping the commandments, of doing Shabbat and celebrating the holy days, it's like shake that foundation, shake that false system that they're clinging onto to its core, to where they will turn to you and say, there's no more hope in that stuff. I want something deeper. I want something that provides me hope. Yeah.
I find it interesting that, if you believe the recording of Jasher and Jubilees, that Abraham was raised by Shem, who was high priest.
Melchizedek, yeah.
Then, essentially he's continuing that kind of activity, that intercession part
of
priesthood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which he likely would have gotten from Shem.
He's defending the defenseless, yeah.
I also see in this like one of the foreshadows of the tribulation, that God will remove his church from the time of judgment. Mm-hmm. God's going to pour out his wrath. He's going to remove us in the rapture.
Yeah. Perhaps that's one view of it, for sure. Psalm 136, I wanted to use the last 5 minutes here to talk about Psalm 136, if you wanted to turn there. This is kind of where we get part of the Hodu. Psalm 136, and just me saying Hodu, I'm sure you'll have that song stuck in your head the rest of the day. It's the Hebrew version of John Jingleheimer Schmidt, or whatever the song is. There you go. Give thanks to Adonai, for he is good, and his grace continues forever. That word there is chesed. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this word, because this is a word that this is an attribute of God that Abraham invoked as he's talking and negotiating for these people. And this is the Hebrew of that word up here on the board. But there are two different types of attributes of God. You have communicable and then you have incommunicable. If I say you have a communicable disease, what does that mean? It's contagious. It spreads. If your disease is incommunicable, it means it can't spread. It's not contagious. You can't catch it. There are attributes of God that are communicable. And what does that mean? That we can catch those attributes. That they're contagious onto us. Can someone name one of these attributes?
Love.
Yeah, absolutely. Love. God is love, and he says he calls us to be love as well. What's another one? What? Peace and compassion. Yeah, peace. You say shalom.
Truth.
And compassion.
Meekness, gentleness.
Truth. Forgiveness. Yeah, you guys get the picture. I'm not going to. Joy. Yeah, meekness. Long suffering and all that. Yeah. Some incommunicable attributes would be like omnipresent. What about this one? Eternal. Pre-existent, omniscient. Yeah. What about this one? This one always stumps people. Holy. Is holy incommunicable or communicable? He says repeatedly in his word, be holy, for I am holy. Yeah, this one is absolutely a communicable attribute. Now, I don't think, and I know for a fact we cannot be as holy as he is, but we can have a degree of his holiness, which just means to be utterly unique. All right? Be set apart.
Yeah, there's not a single time in the scriptures where he calls us, there's not a single person that's called holy in the scriptures.
That's interesting.
You know, in other words, he called Moses this, he called Abraham that, but there's no person called holy in the Bible.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Omnipotent. He is all powerful and we never will be. Those are some incommunicable attributes. But one of the communicable attributes we have of God is this concept of chesed, or he's chesed. And I wanted to talk, and I want to pull this out and kind of open this word up and show you how we can display God's chesed in this world and to those around us. And this just means, the best translation maybe is loving kindness or mercy. But the first one, I want to give you a couple, and then I want to see if you can kind of catch my drift here. But the first one is giving tzedakah, like giving charity to those who have need, giving charity to someone. So juxtapose all this to Sodom, and see if they possess any of these characteristics. Another one might be visiting the sick. Let me add to the poor. What's another one? Any thoughts? Yeah.
And tzedakah, does that mean righteousness?
Yes, it's a synonym of righteousness, and righteousness should produce charity. Righteousness and charity isn't just money. Charity is time, it's words, it's talents that you're using for the kingdom. Yeah.
That's what God called Abraham, righteous.
Yeah.
Justice. So tzedakah.
Yeah, he was a tzaddik. Yeah, tzaddik. You guys get where I'm going with this?
Widows, orphans.
Yeah. Let's call this one providing the needs of a child. And it could be your own or someone else's. Here's another one. Providing for a widow. Right? And there's a rabbi called Moshe ben Yaakov Cordovero who developed this list of these attributes and how we can exemplify them in the world. But there's another one I think is really interesting. It's attending church. No, I'm just kidding. Attending to the... You guys are getting too serious on me here. Attending to the dead. That's odd. What does that mean, attending to the dead? Well, if I lived in the first century, I was probably living, or even prior to that, I was probably living in a multi-generational compound. And it probably, much like we would see maybe in rural Afghanistan, this walled little compound with 3 or 4 generations living in that compound. I'm living with my great-grandparents. They die, and I'm 20-something years old. Who's in charge of preparing that body for burial? I am. Yeah, I grew up with them, I watched them, and I slowly watched them die. Now I have to take that body, I have to dig a hole, and me and my cousins or my brothers, we're going to put that body in the hole, and then we're going to bury it over. And we're so far removed from this concept of death today in today's culture and birth. But that would be on me. And so I would be able to attend to the dead. And I would be able to fulfill mercy, chesed, and I would exemplify God's loving kindness through that deed. There's another one I think is interesting. Escorting a bride to her chuppah. Why is that an act of loving kindness? Let me give you another one. Let me look at my list and make sure I got all the ones. Offering. This will be the last one here. Offering hospitality to strangers. Offering hospitality to strangers. What do all these have in common? They all have one thing in common. Immediate needs? Gifts? Service, yeah. But it's not what I'm looking for. What? They cannot repay you for any of this. You cannot be repaid whatsoever. I mean, giving tzedakah to the poor, you're giving it knowing that you're probably never going to see it again. Providing for a widow, providing for the needs of a child, can they repay you? No. Visiting the sick, they can't repay you for that. Attending to the dead, they can't repay you for that. All of these things, you're doing something and offering something that you know you're never going to see again. Escorting a bride to the chuppah, you're sending her off on the new life, and with a new. Who would escort a bride to the chuppah? The father would. And it's a transference of protectiveness. And you're saying, I know that you can't repay me for everything that I've done the past however many years, but this is me handing you off now and showing that I approve of this union, and that you can't repay me for that. But I think that that's what we're called to do, is to show and display God's chesed in this world, and do it in a way that we don't expect repayment. And I think we do a really good job of that. But I hope this gives you some good practical examples of how we can do that in this world and do a good job at it. Now, the world does the opposite of this, if you think about it. The world co-ops all of that out to something. If it, at best, they co-op all that out to someone else. But expecting something in return. Yeah, absolutely. Are there any questions or comments before I close in prayer today?
I want to say something about providing for a widow. I think one time we did a study on the word widow, and we see it in the prophets. We see it in a lot of places in the Bible, but in many places it actually also means a divorced woman, a woman who has been put away. Yeah. And so
I agree with that.
A lot of that. And so, we don't think about that. We don't think, we don't think about those needs and that aloneness or that financial burden or that type of thing. So that it's a bigger window.
I agree with that. Yeah, totally. Any other thoughts or comments?
There was I had a discussion with somebody at the church one time because there was a woman there and her children lived away, and I said, well, what about these widows? And she said, well, she's not really a widow because she has children. So, but I don't understand that. That's not quite what
That's interesting. No, I don't know that you could back that up with Scripture, but any other thoughts? Okay, cool. We're going to close in prayer real quick, and then we'll set up for Oneg and eat lunch together. Avinu Machenu, Father, our King, we're so grateful that you are a God of mercy and chesed and long-suffering. You're just and you're compassionate. Father, I repent right now on behalf of our nation. Father, bring about justice, but do it in a way that's merciful. And judge our false gods in this nation. Judge our false sense of security. And judge our abundance of everything. Bring us to a place of depravity and full reliance on you and your providence in our lives. Bring this nation back to its knees where we have to cry out for you and your will. Give our leaders wisdom and our politicians guidance. And Father, teach us to love what you love and to hate what you hate. Help us to be a people who are known for chesed and doing selfless acts of mercy. And it's in Yeshua's name we all say. Before I forget, I have a correction I have to make from last week. I said in that thing, I put up a map of all the three patriarchs and where they traveled. And I said, who was the only one to have never left Egypt? And nobody caught me.
I heard you.
Did you? Okay.
I heard you.
Next time, just slap me upside the head. But I meant to say he was the only one that never left Israel, the land, the promised land, and that was Isaac. Okay, all right.
I was so shocked. I thought church.
Yeah, you were like, this guy's walking on thin ice. Thank you guys for your attention.